Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Spotlight, brought to you by Jones Ford Buick GMC, your hometown dealer for more than 50 years. I am Brian Wright, and I'm joined by Maria Vasquez. Once again, we are talking high school football, and this week we are even talking playoff high school football. Now, the AIA would have you believe that this is just a quote-unquote play-in round that isn't official playoffs, but, for all intents and purposes, it is postseason. And we're going to start by talking about our 4A matchups. And so these are all play-in round matchups. We're going to start with 16 teams in 2A, 3A, and 4A, and then they'll whittle it down to an 8-team playoff field next week. So starting in 4A, we've got Casa Grande, which is the number 2 seed at 5-1, going to play Lake Havasu, the number 15 seed at 4-3. These two teams met in week 2. It was a blowout victory for Casa Grande. It was 52-7. And, Angel Flores, Casa Grande's star QB, he had 5 total touchdowns in that game, 2 on the ground, 3 through the air. Lake Havasu could not stop running back RJ Keaton, who ran wild on them for 139 yards and 3 touchdowns on just 7 carries. So Maria, obviously the first matchup was not close. What do you see in the second go around?
So for Lake Havasu, their strength is their running game, and that really struggled against the CG defense the first time they met. Now their 2 top runners are Isaac Stopke and quarterback Donnie Fitzgerald, and Stopke averaged 132.3 yards per game on the ground, and Fitzgerald added 83.3 yards per game. Now, against the CG Union defense, they only combined for 16 total yards on the ground. So if they want to put up somewhat of a fight, that has to be a bit better. But going up against CG Union defense, they haven't really struggled at all season long. I don't see that happening for Lake Havasu.
In the first game, really the only guy who could even move the football for Lake Havasu was their quarterback, Donnie Fitzgerald. And he has some nice athleticism and escapability. He's rushed for 583 yards this year, and he has 11 rushing touchdowns. So I think he's really going to have a big game for them. But, to be honest, the Cougars just have way too much talent here. And I think you're going to see a pretty similar lopsided victory as we saw in the first time around. All right, let's move on to our second 4A matchup, which is going to be Poston Butte, the number 6 seed, coming in at 6-1 against number 11 seed Phoenix St. Mary's at 5-2. So Poston Butte was undefeated until getting upset by Peoria a couple weeks ago, 28-22. They rebounded with a big victory over rival Combs on Friday. And so, I think all the conversations are going to start with Zion Burns, obviously. He's rushed for almost 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns in just obviously the 7 games, averaging almost 12 yards a carry. I want to give some love to Gavin Lloyd as well, their quarterback. He has thrown the ball pretty well, even though they're a running team. He's completed 55% of his throws. He has 10 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. And obviously we know he can hurt you on the ground. He's got 402 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. Maria, this St. Mary's team comes in at 5-2, like I mentioned. What do you think how are they gonna be able to attack Poston Butte?
So St. Mary's has 4 different guys who are really good at running the ball, and they've combined for over 22 touchdowns running the ball. And then you also have quarterback Jason Heffley, who already has over 900 passing yards and 7 touchdowns. The downside here is he also has 5 interceptions. So if the Broncos defense can capitalize on those mistakes, then it should be a pretty easy matchup for the Broncos.
St. Mary's really doesn't like to, I don't know if I should say doesn't like to. They don't throw the ball that much. They only throw the ball about 7 times per game. This is a power running team. They do have 2 running backs that can hurt you in Liam Phelan, who's got just under 800 yards and 7 touchdowns. And then they got another guy, James Atkinson, who is interesting to me because he hasn't played a whole lot this year seems like he's been in and out of the lineup. He only has a small number of carries, but he's averaging over 15 yards a carry, and he's got 7 touchdowns. So he can be really dangerous when touching the ball. But Poston, the big thing for them this year is their defense has been vastly improved. And I look at playmakers like Amari Gilmore at safety. He's got 66 tackles, 4 interceptions, 6 passes defended. And then you got defensive end Bobby Gaitan, who's only a sophomore, and he's got 14 tackles for a loss and 5.5 sacks. So I think the Broncos defense is really the story this year, because we knew that they were going to be potent offensively. Any other thoughts on this game, Maria?
You mentioned it, it's the defense. We already know what the offense is capable with Zion Burns, but if the defense can get those stops, then the Broncos should be moving on to the next round of the playoffs.
Yeah. Let's look at our next 4A matchup, which is Apache Junction, number 8 seed, 3-2. They're hosting number 9 Peoria at 4-3. We just mentioned Peoria is the only team to beat Post and Butte. Got to give a lot of credit here to first-year head coach Bruce Binkley at AJ. I mean, to have them not just in this play-in round, but to have them hosting a game is really remarkable when you consider some of the players they lost last year, specifically Gibson Lamangelo at quarterback. Now you've got his younger brother, Gavin Lamangelo, in there. And it's funny to me because he's doing much the same of what Gibson did when he was there, which is really carrying the offense. And so Gavin, impressively, he's completed almost 63% of his passes, 1,092 yards, 8 touchdowns. And then he also is leading the team in rushing, 569 yards, 3 touchdowns. So he's been great. And then, of course, Cameron Garcia is a monster at wide receiver. He's got 751 yards through just 5 games. I mean, you look at a 10-game regular season, that would be a 1,500-yard season. So Cameron Garcia is really outstanding. Maria, what are some of your thoughts when you look at this matchup?
So my concern with the prospectors is they are coming off a 2-week quarantine. So while every other playoff team, they pretty much battled throughout to get to this point, prospectors, haven't even been able to come together for a practice or anything. So, I'm wondering, are they going to be a little rusty? You mentioned the Lamangelo and Garcia connection. How's that going to work out when, they haven't done anything for the past 2 weeks? So you mentioned Peoria, and they were the only team to hand Post and Butte that loss. So, I mean, if there are those miscues for the prospectors, that Peoria is going to capitalize on those opportunities.
Peoria does have a couple guys who can get after the quarterback. Jake Price and Brendan Hurd both have 5 sacks. So I think it's going to be really important for the prospectors to give Gavin Lamangelo time to throw and, for them to be able to run their offense. And on the defensive side of the ball, the prospectors, their heart and soul really is Brody Bullard at linebacker. And, he's a guy really who plays in the middle of that defense and can fly around and make some plays. So I think he'll have to have a big game as well. Any final thoughts on that game, Maria?
It's going to be a closer matchup than we expect. I mean, I don't think either team is really going to run away with it. You mentioned the defense with Brody Bullard. It's going to come down to that, I think. Can Peoria shut down Gavin Lamangelo and Cameron Garcia?
All right. Well, we didn't have any 3A teams qualify for the postseason, so we're going to move on to 2A. And we've got number 3 Santa Cruz at 5-1, facing number 14 Veritas Prep at 3-3. Santa Cruz's only loss came to 4A Casa Grande, and not just 4A, but probably the best team in all of Class 4A. So, Santa Cruz has just flat out dominated all year long, specifically at 2A opponents. I don't think there's another 2A team that can compete with them. Of course, we always talk about Hunter Ogle. Some people may get tired of hearing about it. I don't get tired of talking about it. Hunter has got over 1,200 yards rushing and 16 touchdowns, averaging over 200 yards a game. He's also their best defensive player. He plays an outstanding linebacker. But, Maria, you cover this team. So tell us a little bit about some of the other impact players for the Dust Devils.
So besides Hunter Ogle, they have a lot of guys who can help out and run the ball, like Ricardo Alanis, David Aviles, and Steve Calvin. So I mean, if some team miraculously happens to slow down Hunter Ogle, hey, you're going to have a long list of guys behind him who can power through. Now, the thing is, you mentioned Santa Cruz is ranked number 3, and their only loss was to a 4A school. So I know these Dust Devils are going to come in with a little chip on their shoulder because of the disrespect that's been shown to them for being the number 3 seed when, they should have been higher. So with that being said, it's going to be a tough night for Veritas prep just because, hey, they're coming in with that chip on their shoulder. And also, they had a bye week last week. Their game got canceled. They didn't schedule anyone. So they're a little more rested up than everybody else.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about Santa Cruz being a little ticked off about that seeding. And you say they should have been higher. I mean, I'll just say it. They should have been the unquestioned number 1, and really there should have been no discussion about who was the number 1 team. It should have been Santa Cruz. Veritas Prep, they are going to have some issues. I think their quarterback, Gage Lentz, he has 9 touchdown passes. But his big issue is he has a propensity to turn the ball over. He has 9 interceptions. And we know that the Santa Cruz defense is a team that can take the ball away. You've got guys like Steve Calvin, Wyatt Ogle, and Dylan Huckel, who, all have interceptions on the season. Ogle and Huckel have multiple interceptions on the season. I think that could be an issue for Veritas Prep. And, their biggest weapon is probably their running back, Nisa Mafu. But again, this Santa Cruz team is loaded, and I don't see Veritas Prep being able to get much going against them. Okay, let's move on to our next 2A matchup, which is going to be Sequoia Pathway. They're in their first year, obviously, in the AIA. So big credit to them for being in the postseason. And they're the number 12 seed at 4-2. They're going to go on the road to Morenci, number 5 seed at 6-1. Sequoia Pathway kind of drives me nuts. They're hard to figure out. They do have some significant talent on the roster, but they also have a propensity to play with a lack of discipline and rack up penalties. And sometimes they just don't look like they're ready to play. Quarterback Alex Montano, he's big for them. He's thrown for 955 yards and 13 touchdowns. And then they have a couple of big playmakers, running back Isaiah Stewart and wide receiver Ufiel Jones, who has 306 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Maria, what's your kind of take on the Pumas as they go on the road to play higher ranked Morenci?
So besides Santa Cruz, I think this is going to be Sequoia Pathway's biggest test going up against Morenci. Now, much like Santa Cruz, Morenci's strength is their running game. They have 6 different guys who can move the ball. But unlike Santa Cruz, they don't have that one go-to guy like Hunter Ogle. So I think Sequoia Pathway might be a little more balanced out with their offensive attack, like you mentioned with quarterback Alex Montano. But still, I mean, for Morenci, you also have to be on the lookout for quarterback Dalen Johnson and his go-to receiver in Maddox Martinez.
Yeah, and I think it's a difficult road trip. I mean, you're traveling almost 4 hours to go all the way out to Morenci. I mean, at that point, you're getting pretty close to New Mexico. You're so far in eastern Arizona, so that's a tough road trip. And Morenci's been pretty tough all year. Their top running back is LT Mori. They really spread the ball around, but LT Mori is their leading back with 584 yards and 9 touchdowns in those 7 games. And I think this is going to be a big challenge for Sequoia Pathway. But again, for them just being in the postseason is a pretty big accomplishment in year 1 in the AIA. Okay, let's move on to 1A now. And instead of playing round, we are in the real playoffs in 1A. And in fact, we're already into the semifinals. Superior won its quarterfinal game last week, 76-20. So they're in the 1A semifinals now, where they will take on Williams. Superior is the number 3 seed at 6-0. Williams is the number 2 seed at 5-1. These 2 teams played in the 1A championship game last year, which Williams won. So this is a big time kind of rematch. And Maria, you spoke to Ryan Palmer on Friday night after their playoff game. So what's your take on Superior right now?
So, Coach Palmer, he's confident in what his team can do, but at the same time, he told me that they hadn't really been tested at all during the regular season. So this is going to be like their first big opponent, and it's a familiar one. And he also mentioned that he's expecting his senior class, who have made it to the championship game every single year. They're expecting to be back there again, but they have to go through that familiar opponent. And one guy who really stands out is Adam Navarrete. He's pretty much the do-all guy for the Panthers. He has 924 total yards, and that includes receiving, passing, and rushing. So if you're looking for one guy that the Panthers kind of rely on, it's Navarrete.
Yeah, Navarrete is an incredible player. I've watched him really his whole career since he was a freshman. I really only get a chance to watch Superior in the playoffs, but I've been covering them in the playoffs for each of the last 3 years. And he is so versatile. He's a small guy. He plays much bigger than his size. He's physical. He can take hits. He can give out hits. And they line him up, like you mentioned, everywhere. He could be returning kicks. He could be catching passes. He could be running the ball. He could even be throwing the ball. This guy plays a mean defensive back. I mean, he is just fantastic. I also want to mention Matthew Cruz, their quarterback. He's thrown 17 touchdowns, just 1 interception. His completion percentage is down from where it was a year ago. So that concerns me a little bit because I believe Matthew Cruz to be a very accurate passer. But this is a really deep team. Like you mentioned, they have a lot of seniors. Their leading receiver is Nathan Duarte. He's got 449 yards, 7 touchdowns. Matthew Diaz-Gonzalez is a really good two-way player for them. But Williams, again, provides a very big challenge. They won the title last year, and I'm not sure exactly how many guys they return, but I know they're going to be strong again. So I expect a really good game here. What are your final thoughts on this matchup?
I mean, we've broken down all the other playoff games, but I think that this 1A matchup is going to be the most competitive out of all of them.
Okay, so let's move on now. This next game we're going to talk about is Maricopa. And Maricopa, this is not a play-in round game. 5A is doing things a little bit differently. They have 8 regular season games as opposed to 7. So Maricopa, this is a regular season game, but Maricopa is still alive for a playoff spot. They're going to play Gilbert, Campo, Verde. Maricopa right now is number 20 in the PowerPoints. Campo Verde is number 9. And if Maricopa wins this game, they do have a shot to get in. So they are still alive, although kind of just barely. The Rams, I think it's good for them because they seem to be as close to 100% right now as they're going to get. They had a lot of issues with injuries and ineligibility earlier in the season, and that created a lot of turnover with their roster and inconsistency. Now, they've kind of got the team that they know they're going to have. They've gotten some certainty at the quarterback position where they have Cassius Campbell playing. Mr. Chavis is just an outstanding running back for them, one of the best running backs in the state. Now, last week, Maricopa played Gilbert, and it was a really close game. I mean, it was a defensive struggle kind of game. They lost 13-7. But, I think that the Maricopa Rams, their defense is really good, and it's something that can keep them in the game. Maria, when you take a look at this matchup, what do you think?
So for Campo Verde, it's the backfield combination with quarterback Riley Garcia and running back Caden Callaway. Now, Garcia has a 65% completion rate, over 600 passing yards, and then you add in Callaway, who has over 600 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. Now, you mentioned the Maricopa defense. Here it's going to be, okay, who do you try to stop? Either the rushing game or the passing game? Because, I mean, Campo Verde is pretty good at both of them, and they're evenly balanced out.
Yeah, I mentioned Mr. Chavis as their star running back. He's another one of these guys who can line up all over the place. And he had a really big game on defense last week against Gilbert. So that's something to watch for Maricopa as well. I don't know. I'm interested to see how this one turns out because this is kind of the last opportunity for Maricopa. They're still alive, like I said, just barely for a playoff spot. I know it would mean a lot to Coach Brandon Harris and this team to just make the playoffs. So this is a big game for them. Although Gilbert Campo Verde, traditionally a strong team. So this is going to be a tough game. It's at Maricopa, which, without a lot of fans these days, I don't know how much impact that makes, but I think that the Rams are going to be competitive in this game. I don't know if they're going to win it, but I think they're going to be competitive. Any final thoughts on that one?
You mentioned it, it's hard to tell just, how well Maricopa is going to do. You mentioned the uncertainty at quarterback, but hey, they finally got Mr. James back. So that's a win on its own.
Okay, and then I also want to mention we have 2 other Pinal County games this week, but these teams have already been eliminated from postseason contention. So we're not going to break down these games, but I do want to mention we have Florence hosting Santa Ana Foothills, so that's a Pinal game. And then you have Combs is going to host Phoenix Arcadia. And of course, we know Arcadia is coached by former AJ coach Vance Miller, so that's interesting. But that does it for our breakdowns on these football games. Remember to visit pinalcentral.com for all of your Pinal County playoff football action, and we will see you next week.